Hello, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. Welcome to another WineShark Wednesday, brought to you by yours truly, WineShark. So, yeah, apparently, um, it's yet another week gone by. We are now right in the midst of our holiday fun time. It's December. We're only now 16 days away from December Ween. Hooray! So that's going to be kind of fun. So I hope everybody is doing well out there and you've had a good week. I know I have. It's been moderately productive, not nearly as much as I'd like, but hey, sometimes that happens. So anyway, we're going to have some fun today talking about some blending topics and things like that. But I wanted to remind you guys we got a show coming up on Saturday, Reunion Tower. It's myself and Two Penny Beer with a combination beer and wine show, 500 feet above the Dallas skyline. Well, in the Dallas skyline, actually. So 500 feet above the ground. So, anyway, it's going to be a great show. 3 beers, 3 wines, a little bit of food sample, kind of a preview of what we do for our in-person private tastings. And it will be a lot of fun. So all is grand with that. Also, we got a short month, just to remind everybody. We've only got 2 more online shows on Fridays. We've got the cheese show coming up on this Friday, and then we're going to do a Deck the Hall show the week following. And then maybe one more Wednesday show, although I might do a show on the 30th to close out the year. I have yet to decide. We'll see what goes down there. But I'll let you guys know a few days in advance. I'll be on holiday break, and I'll probably just need a glass of wine and to chat with you folks. So there is that. So hello to Dave and Mary. Hello to Miss Donna. Welcome to the show. Hope everybody's doing well. So yeah, the show today, we're going to talk about blending wines. This is a topic that's going to span several different shows on the Friday shows, but I wanted to bring just a little bit of the content for you guys here on WineShark Wednesday because it's a question that I get a lot. The content's very deep, and I'm only going to scratch the kind of the first bit of the surface here. So yeah, that's a great option for us, and we're even going to try a good sample. The idea, even though it came from me for another show. In fact, actually, David Thomas actually suggested it. The topic we did last Friday, and so while I've already gotten some groundwork ahead of time, it was also in choosing the grocery store grab for the rest of the month. I went through the store, and one of the wines that I wanted to try happens to be this Sterling Vintner's Collection Meritage. I looked at it and was like, oh, I really want to talk about 2 things. It's a 2-for-1 deal because 1, we're going to get to talk about second labels for wines, and 2, we'll talk about blending wines. Meritage is a delightful little nickname from California for blending wines. So anyway, without any further ado, let's talk about how wines and why wines are blended. How, when, where, why, all the kind of important details you guys want to know. So you've heard me talk a little bit about the trend in red blends becoming more popular over the last 5 to 7 years in the wine world, which I think is excellent. So we kind of need to discuss how that and what's the purpose behind that. One of the interesting misnomers that I often get from students in class is the idea that blend wines are somehow leftovers or inferior styles of wine, which, to be honest with you, could be no further from the truth. Some of the most prestigious wines in the world are blends by definition. So blending is not a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. It's very much a good thing that the winemaker uses. Now, back in history, originally wines were blended in what they called a field blend, meaning what was naturally occurring in a field of grapes that were harvested and then blended together. Originally, it's what made grapes taste different from different places. Not only were the soils and climate things different, but also the specific breed and types of grapes that were being grown would be mixed together by default to say, okay, here's the grape, bring everything in, mash it up, make wine. It tastes like it's from there. So later, as viticulture became more advanced and more specific in trying to stylize wines, not just make them grow as far as an agricultural crop was concerned, but a very specific style of crop, then we began purposeful viticulturally field blending, meaning we would take grapes from different varieties, grow them side by side, and then use that as the final blend, but controlling these types of grapes rather than just letting it be a naturally occurring phenomenon. So, hello to Shannon. Hello to Miss from South Cali, from Betty and Mark. Hello. So Betty and Mark and Dave and Mary have actually heard some of this content. We talked about this on the last blend show, so this won't be news to y'all, but for the rest of everybody. Anyway, so purposeful field blending It still actually occurs today, but it's not exactly what one thinks of when we think about blending wines. Places like port or port wines from Oporto in Portugal are actually still grown this way, where they grow rows of different styles of grapes together and then mash them all up. The problem with that, or the challenge rather with that, is the fact that you're kind of fixed because you've decided what the amounts of grapes are going to be in, at least as far as the yield is concerned, when it comes to planting X number of rows of grape type A, then grape type B, then grape type C. So there's a little more, I guess, it's a little more prescripted when it comes to those styles of blends. But field blends are not really common overall in the wine world anymore. But it does begin the world of blending, and a concept that still sticks true to this day, and that idea of what grows together goes together. This means that grapes that grow in certain environmental conditions tend to be blended with grapes that also flourish in those same climatic conditions. It's one of the reasons, for instance, you don't see, say, a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Pinot Noir cross blend, because those two different types of grapes don't grow in the same under the same conditions. They're very climatically different. So this field blending style then later emerges into blending within the winery, which is the bulk of what we're going to talk about today. When we talk about actual blending wines, we're normally talking about a vintner taking the grape juice after it's been pressed, mostly after it's fermented, and then blending that together to create a final product. It's much more the cook's hand, if you will. There's an old axiom slash adage, that's what you get when you mix those two words together, that what great wine is made in the vineyard. And while I believe that's partially true, that basically is a very big capture to the concept of this place is special. And again, it goes on to the what I would call the tyranny of terroir, because places that control high value grapes and therefore make high value wines that are very prestigious want to basically put themselves at the top of the pyramid and make, and anything that attempts to do the same thing can't be as good. Okay, so that is kind of the direction that goes. But let's talk about why blending is so important. Why it's not just about what's in the vineyard. You can have the greatest soil and the greatest grapes in the world, but if you have a talentless winemaker or an uncreative winemaker, you're not going to get the best product possible. Purposely, you can take a really talented winemaker who can take reasonable amounts of reasonable fruit and generally come out with a pretty good product. So the winemaker has a lot to say in the hundreds of decisions that are made before we go from grape to glass. So winery blends usually involve two broad classes or styles. One of the things that we don't even consider a blend wine, because it's not labeled as such, are when grapes from different areas or locations are used. In the broad sense of things, for instance, non-AVA or non-AOC wines that have, for instance, a California red versus a Napa red, would be, these wines are basically grown in the grapes are grown in different places, and therefore they cannot claim a heritage prestige from a particular piece of terroir. While that is fine, that is mostly done for economic reasons. It is rarely done particularly to control the end product of the grape, what you're going to see in the actual wine bottle. However, at the small level and at the high prestige level, you occasionally will see, if you look into the vineyard's creation notes, you will often see information about different blocks or different regions of their own grapes being used. For instance, you might have something like a Napa Cabernet Sauvignon that's got some percentage of grapes from Mount Veeder and another bit from Oakville. Okay, so this is an example where you're getting where the winemaker has physically separate places where the fruit is grown, which gives them slightly different characteristics. So this is done generally, though, for ripeness purposes, for economic purposes, and sometimes for the slight terroir differences you're going to get. So if a winemaker just has access to a couple of acres here and a couple of acres there, and that's what he needs to make the amount of wine that he wants to, that's often where you're going to get locationally blended wines together. Remember that it's generally considered more prestigious to put a single vineyard down on your winery, but to be honest with you, remember, with a vineyard having a limited size, that means you also have a limited quantity of that you can sell, which therefore limits the amount of the potential that you're going to end up reaching. So hyper-specific, single vineyard wines are very cool when you can taste them side by side against other wines. They aren't necessarily any better than their neighbors. They're generally speaking different, unless of course you've got more of that tyranny of terroir attitude. So economics, terroir, maybe, and ripeness. Ripeness is a big deal. For instance, how the weather is affecting your grape crop that year will determine what time you're going to start your harvesting. And so the different blocks might ripen at different times, which allows a staggered system of harvest, which can help wineries a lot. Okay? But far and away, again, to get the very base of the pyramid, we kind of started at the pyramid and worked our way backwards. The bulk of what we think of when we think of blend wines is different juice from different varietals of grapes. This is where we're talking about things like a Cabernet Merlot blend or a Cabernet Merlot Cabernet Franc blend, which would be the iconic Bordeaux style of blend. Okay, many very popular blend style wines are created with a specific recipe is actually the wrong word, and we're going to talk about that in a little while, but a specific group or style of grapes that are pretty common. For instance, the Bordeaux blend is usually either Cabernet heavy with Merlot and Cabernet Franc beside, or it is Merlot heavy with Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc beside. In Tuscany, right, we have the Sangiovese blends of Chianti, which are Sangiovese driven, but then also have other grapes attached. Then we have things like Chateauneuf du Pape. Chateauneuf du Pape has, Grenache Syrah Mourvedre at its core, usually with Grenache heavy. So these are kind of the examples of where grapes and grape blending have become the signature of certain very prestigious areas of winemaking. But the rationale in behind that, from the winemaker's perspective, are several factors. For instance, they're using different varieties of grapes because of their variations in body, or whether it's the mouthfeel that they have, the mouth filling effect they have on your palate. Color. Certain grapes will bring more intense and darker colors. If you want a more color, more starkly colored wine, nice, deep, dark, rich colors, you might bring different grapes into the fold. Alcohol levels. Different grapes will produce different alcohol concentrations based on their fermentation profiles. Tannins, thicker skinned or thicker skinned and or heavier seeded grapes will tend to bring more tannin to the table, mostly the skins. Acids, certain grape varieties are higher in acid qualities. And then last, primary fruit and flavor components. In other words, the flavors styles of different grapes are really kind of at the core when we talk about what winemakers are using those grapes for. They're oftentimes aiming at these ones have more blue fruit driven flavors. These over here have more red fruit driven flavors. We're going to blend them together to get what we want. So each one of the grapes brings, something slightly different. Now there are, as we've talked in the past, maybe 400 or 500 commercially viable different grapes. There's a lot of grapes that are very similar in profile that don't necessarily make the cut of a difference there. But for the most part, we're talking about the grapes that we do choose have a significant enough difference in flavor that's the reason they're blended together. Now, oftentimes these types of grape grown within a certain region are controlled by their rules of viticulture. For instance, in the AOC system of France or AOP system, depending on how modern we want to be, they prescribe that you must use these types of grapes, sometimes in certain quantities, sometimes not. That's one of the many things that in old world style controls, you'll see a lot more finger on the scale with that. And that's from a heritage quality control standpoint. Whereas in the new world, it's a lot more gloves off, free form, and you're able to do whatever you want so long as it's within a geographic area and meets certain quality standards. So anyway, side note to AOC stuff. But last but never least, we talk about the, when does the process happen? Actually, we got a little more than just when, but when we talk about the process, this is, again, one of those many, many choices that winemakers are making. So they can choose to blend early, which means when we say early, what we're talking is immediately after fermentation of the grape. So you bring your grapes in from harvest, get them all into crush or whatever method you happen to be using. You start your fermentation. Immediately after that's complete, you start blending in the components of what we generally call kind of the standard blend, certain percentages. In other words, your winemaker probably has a pretty firm idea of what they're going to start with. They're going to say, okay, we're going to say something like this is going to be 65% Grenache and 25% Merlot, and we're going to mix the rest. Okay, cool. Just random examples of grapes. Nothing serious about that. But those percentages, immediately after that, they're going to throw in what they've got at a harvest for that. And then they'll start tweaking. We'll talk about that process in a second. Alternately, you can do wine blending later in the aging process during the racking and aging process. Okay, so when the wine is now in barrel and laying down to rest. This allows a little bit more control of flavor, but it lacks the early advantage of structure and complexity. The sooner you blend, the more you're really joining these two things together. Whereas later down the road, you might be able to taste the wine as it's developing and kind of smooth out the rough spots, if you will. Smooth the peaks, fill the valleys, as I've got in my notes. You can also then tweak the profile as the wine is developing, because the winemakers are constantly tasting this wine as they drink it, or as they age it, rather. So the standard blend, this rough percentages of what we're talking about, is then adjusted to what the winemaker's end goal is. And while the winemaker is not usually alone in this decision, while you might have somebody who's the final decider, you've often got a team, depending on the size of your winery, who are working together to put anywhere from a couple dozen to 40 to 60 different blends together. So this is little tiny variations that are coming from different barrels, perhaps of different grape varieties, perhaps from different locations, but all that thing is going into a matrix. You're sampling each one of them. You're going, okay, this one's a little spicier than that one. This one's a little, more vanilla than this one. And you're writing all this down, taking all track of it, and then deciding, okay, when we blend these three things together, this is the product that we're happiest with. So this iterative process of blending and tasting and blending and tasting is a really experimental but very critical part to coming out with a product that the winemaker is happy with. So a lot of this, by the way, is way more art than it is science. A lot of the stuff that I read was there are some counterintuitive things in this process that you wouldn't necessarily think, that certainly don't match any known science we have. So, as an example, you might have two wines that have very smooth tannins, and you put them together and blend, and all of a sudden something breaks in there, and they become this, weird tannic mess. This is not something that you can say with as cleanly as, if you mix this much baking soda with this much, water, you get this following product, right? So the less science, more art is definitely it's the cook in the kitchen seasoning the food. There's no really right answer except how things taste. Knowing what's right is a really kind of key thing with this, and it's not something you can just follow off of a formula. This again is very different than the beer and spirits world, generally speaking. Although the spirits world does have a little similar thing. For instance, in bourbons, they have a similar process of grain bills, yeast strains, and then blending the product to get something that is consistent with the final answer. But especially with the world of beer, for instance, it's much more straightforward of this recipe, you follow this recipe. You're not blending the beer together later. So this is once the winemaker has gone through all this iterative process, has done this fine and decided on a final blend, they generally take those wines out of the barrel, put them in a big blending vat, get it all marinated up, and then re-rack it into barrels for final aging, and then eventually into the bottling. Okay. The other thing that I think people get surprised by is the small amount of wines present that can make a big change in a wine's taste. So some of these blends might have 1, 2, 3, 5% of a juice of one style or another. So it's got 2% Pinot Noir, for instance, or 2% Petit Verdot. These don't seem like a lot, but the reality is, from the tasting perspective, they very much make the final product the right direction you look for. Again, use Randy Lang from Lang Twins always referred to it as a spice rack, and I love that analogy, because the spice rack analogy, what just the right amount of garlic tastes like, but if it was absent, you may not necessarily notice. Or the difference between 1% garlic and 5% garlic is the difference between a little with just a hint and way too much. So I know there's somebody in the comments going to be, there's no such thing as too much garlic. Yeah, whatever. But anyway, the percentages, although small, are also interestingly what I would call not detectable by themselves. In other words, even a trained taster, generally speaking, is not going to sit down with a wine and sip it and go, ah, that's got 3% Petit Verdot in it. Because they don't stand out in that type of fashion. In fact, they're more, as I said before, that right integration into the overall picture. Where if you had the ability to take two blends, one with and one without a small percentage of something, and you taste them back to back, you could go, oh, I see the difference. But without the comparative, you're generally speaking just going to say, oh, okay, I like what this wine's got going on. It's got that little hint of garlic. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm thinking about garlic in my wine. It's freaking me out. Let's use bacon as a better example, which is really, believe it or not, a thing. So the idea that those little percentages make a big difference is something that winemakers very much embrace, and it is an interesting part of the blending world. Wine Folly, one of the Reddit articles that I read from them, and then one of my, they're obviously I'm a very big fan. They talk about three phases of wine's approach in the mouth and how different grapes attach themselves to each one of those phases. They talk about the approach, they talk about the mid palate, they talk about the finish. And when we drink wine, those three factors, different grapes tend to have strengths or weaknesses in one or many of those things, depending on the style of grapes. And the blends that you generally see usually harmonize those types of things together. So in a GSM blend, for instance, Syrah is playing the front end of the wine as a big fruit front end, as well as the Grenache, as well as the Mourvedre, whereas the Grenache is playing the middle fiddle. So it is just a difference in where you're feeling those things is another part of that body, color, alcohol, tannin, acid, and primary fruit flavor component. Okay. The other thing that I've talked about from some of the winemakers that I know that I've had this discussion with is that they talk about making the wine more than just the sum of its parts, right? That the blending act is literally the winemaker being able to make the right thing out of what Mother Nature gave them, about taking advantage and working with their crop rather than against it. Because if they were to stick to a tried and true number system, you always use this ton, many tons of this many tons of that, this many percent of this many percent of that. If you did that, you'd find that your wine was starting to vary in the same way that your weather and your quality of grape vary. You need to basically help guide Mother Nature down that perfect path to take what is given and turn it into the best thing possible. So that has always resonated with me as a very rational and, more importantly, what a real respect for the people who do build the wines. It's not just as simple as growing grapes, squishing grapes, and sticking them in a vat. It just doesn't work that way. So another little hint when it comes to blended wines, usually when there are just several types of grapes, two or three, that when they're listed on the label as a blend, for instance, a GSM or Grenache Syrah Mourvedre blend or a Cabernet Merlot blend, um, you'll find often that the first grape in whatever list is the predominant grape by percentage of grapes. So a Cab Merlot is mostly Cab with a little bit of Merlot. That's not a requirement. That's just a kind of a trend that I've noticed about winemaking in both mostly in the New World. In the Old World, they don't use that system. They're always talking about where they're from, so it's a little bit different. Anyway, the grocery store grab. Let's talk about examples because we had a good example brought to you by today, and that is the Sterling Vintners Collection Meritage. Meritage. I always want to say Meritage, and that's actually not how it's pronounced. I'll go ahead and show you guys the label here. So the Sterling Vintners Collection Meritage. Meritage is a portmanteau, which is a fun word to say. A portmanteau being the combination of the word merit and heritage, as in meritage. The reason that this wine word was created in Napa was to separate Napa's red wine blends from the Bordeaux style blends that they are so fond of. In other words, they were tired of attaching the word Bordeaux to Napa to describe their wines, and we're trying to break out of that concept. So generally, though, Meritage has come to mean simply a blend. You may also see the word cuvee written on certain wines. It means basically the same thing. So that is the proper pronunciation of it. But this is the Vintner's collection from Sterling. The other interesting thing I wanted to talk about, and the reason this wine was selected, was because it is a second label. Sterling, one of my favorite wineries in Napa, locationally speaking. I love they have a nice little mountain, this little hilltop that you ride up in a tram, and it overlooks the northern portion of the valley, and it is really, really cool. You feel like you're kind of the king of the world when you're sitting up on their balcony drinking wine and looking at all the little pigeons below you. So, this is their Vintner's Collection series. This is their second label. Sterling is their flagship, and it's usually a $40 to $80 bottle of wine, depending on on their styles within house. Whereas their Vintner's Collection is very much targeted at their bargain line. This was listed at $16.99 for list price and was $10 at the final grocery store counter after your club discount. So this is basically their wines run in the basically I think $9 to $12 range in the Vintner's Collection. So they're not top of the pile. They are very much aimed at our grocery store market. So this is a perfect case as an example of a winery who has enough capital, chops, etc., part of a big enough organization to afford slash market slash disseminate and deliver a whole other range of wines within their wine portfolio. It opens up different markets. It allows them to take advantage of inexpensively priced fruit, or even to take their highest quality fruit, reserve it for their main lines, and use their next quality down. Now, don't take that to mean that that is a cast off. That's just necessarily means that if you're going to put things on a rating scale, something's got to be on the lower side of the scale. One of the things I've always thought about second labels is that when a second label is made, if it's still got the same winemaking team behind the quality control of what they're trying to do, you're probably going to find a wine that is very much to your taste if you like their flagship range, simply because they've got talented people working on the problem, even if they don't have the same quality of raw materials due to expense, etc. So Vintner's Collection, the Sterling Vintner's Collection, has been there for a while as this particular style. I've been drinking this stuff for nigh on 20 years now, and it always has seemed to be a pretty good entry into that $10 to $15 price range. So we're going to give it a shot. Let's talk about the grocery store grab, though. The grocery store grab is a idea where we basically focus on non-big box and non-specialty stores, basically wines that we can get at your grocery store that you may shop at either out of necessity or convenience or whichever reason that you choose. Generally speaking, grocery stores can be a minefield of options, choices, and generally speaking, overpriced wines. So we want to make sure that we reward wines that use good labeling, that are transparent about what's in the bottle, and can get us a good price for dollar, the best wine values that we can find. So the Vintner's Collection labeling, obviously, as you saw, was this nice, very plain silver label. But you saw the front label there is really not much focused on other than saying the word Meritage. On the back label, they do have a little bit more information, including the usual government warnings, etc., legally required schmear. This is the Sterling Vintner's Collection California Meritage Redwine 2017. So it tells us, right, what's in the bottle. Well, sort of. It tells us it's a Meritage red wine. It tells us where it's from. It is from California. That means it is not necessarily from any one area of California. It is broadly from the California wineries, okay, or so from vineyards. And then the marketing text reads as such. This is the Sterling Vintner's Collection, built by the hand and touch of our winemakers from the select vineyards to create a wine of balance and elegance. Sip our Meritage with bold fare and friends, and savor the bright and fruit aromas and vanilla oak spices with notes of black raspberries and dark chocolate. So, what does the wine taste like? They're using flavor words, and they're using some decently specific ones. I mean, we've got the idea of dark chocolate and black raspberries. Those are nice specific flavors that we can associate. Vanilla oak spices. That's a little bit blending the worlds there. Oak is said to give wine a vanilla-like sweetness. or vanilla-like flavor. So therefore, I'm mixing those two is a little odd. But if you just left out the word oak and said vanilla, I think you'd be happier. Um, the oak is there for the wine people to say, oh, it's got oak in it, right? So the bad news here is that they did not give us the specific varieties of grapes that are blended into this Meritage red wine. They are leaving us to wonder and to guess, which is not necessarily the best thing for label. Now, they do say, they've got Enjoy Responsible and they've got a link to their website, but this is a thing where I really want to advocate for modern wine labeling. They've got a UPC code on here that's for management of the wine at as a product category. There's no reason they shouldn't also have a code on here to use to link to actual virtual data, because this is one of those things where there shouldn't be any excuse as to why you don't label the types of grape in your wine. But this is kind of the broad, I'd say overall they're getting a probably a B minus. I mean, when it comes to red blends, I really want to see them tell us why. What their grapes in. Why do I want to see that? Because if you like the wine, I'd like you to be able to recreate and look for other examples of blended wines, or even other examples of monovarietal wines that are strong in those particular grapes. So if this is a Merlot base or Cab base or Grenache base, we don't know. Now, we try and sleuth some stuff out, and there may be information on their website about it, but it's not on the bottle. And you're not responsible for going to a website just to figure out what you're picking at the grocery store, right? So anyway, we're going to do a little bit of our tasting notes here. We try to answer 3 questions. Is it well executed? Is it on style? And is it worth the price tag? So we're in the $10 range for our wine purpose here. So we need to frame everything around that. I always remember, when we're talking about wines, where we go up and down the price scale, there can be differences. What we're always doing, of course, is looking for diamonds in the rough, right? We'd love to have a $10 wine that drinks like a $20 bottle of wine, that has that kind of option to it. But Sterling's this is a pretty broad vineyard, so this is not something I'd expect necessarily to be one of those true diamonds in the rough. It's just one of those solid standbys, I think, that we should be able to count on them and to be a good label and to produce a product that protects their brand. Because remember, they are putting their name on the bottle. That's one of the things that is the risk of a second brand, is that you can't. I am sorry about your small penis. Anyway, so it's really a whole thing when we talk about putting your brand and label on something means you had better produce at least a quality product to the level of expectation for its price point. So in this at the $10 level had better taste like Sterling owns some of it. So what do we got here? All right. Well, we definitely have those darker fruit flavors. I like that black raspberry note that they put in there, but honestly, I'm also getting some of that blackberry or black plum. Very much on the dark side of the flavor spectrum when it comes to red wines. Generally talk about red, blue, or black fruits, or red or black for some people, just limited to those two. But this is definitely on that darker end of the street. Does not smell rich and heady. It doesn't have a big spice aroma to it. It's got a pretty clean fruit profile. Right, and so there is a little bit of that hint in there of that vanilla. This is that it doesn't have a big hint, so it's not a really rich smelling wine, but there's a little bit of it in the background. You can kind of smell the oak. There's a little bit of heat on there too. You can kind of smell the alcohol coming off of it. So this is probably, I'm gonna guess, probably at least a 14% ABV, if not 13, if not very close. I did not see it easily listed on the label. Where are you hiding it? Yeah, 13.5. So they're right in the range. Which again, that's not super hot. 15% or of is the higher end of the scale. So this is high but not overwhelming, which is good. But it does definitely present the nose. So let's take a sip and see how we do. Okay. Despite the black fruit aromas, it definitely brings almost a brighter red fruit to the front of the palate. It has that black raspberry is another great descriptor, but raspberry-esque or red currant front end that very much reminds me of something like a Grenache. But the nose on it is all in the Merlot, Merlot slash Syrah range. Whereas this, man, definitely comes in with red fruit. It's got a little bit of acidity. The tannins are really mild. This is not a big grippy red. It's not jumping out and banging on your palate because just to say, hey, pay attention to me. Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of bite up in the front, a little tan that carries it. It's very mild. This is definitely a mid-bodied Meritage by any stretch of the imagination. But as far as blends go, this is very much that lighter style. That, to be honest with you, I'm actually quite surprised. Usually, and again, it does say California on the label rather than Napa, but I associate Sterling with Napa because that's where they're located. So usually, when you think Meritage and you think Napa, you think bigger wines. You think Bordeaux style blends. We're talking about even the Merlot driven Bordeaux blends are still pretty heavy monsters. This is delightfully open, really easy drink, and I am duly impressed. I am not disappointed at all. Now, the so that is it well crafted? Absolutely, it's definitely a well executed wine. It's finger, it's it lingers on the finish just a little bit. So it's not just a quaffer like there and gone, but it is a really well executed wine. Is it on style? Always with the blends, this is the hard thing. Without telling me your what style you're playing to, no, we really can't answer that question because I don't know what it is that they're aiming for. They're just aiming for red wine. So again, maybe that's a marketing choice is that they are aiming at the people who do not care for or need to know that level of detail. But I know that they also make a lot of monovarietal wines from this same second label. So obviously they're making Cabernets and Merlots and Pinot Noirs from the same thing. So if they want you to know, then they're not doing a good job of telling you the style. And if they don't want you to know, then they're telling you too much about the other stuff. So I think they need to pick one way or the other. Then lastly, is it worth the price tag? Oh, dude, for a $10 bottle of wine, totally killing it. I would definitely purchase again. I'm actually very surprised. I've tried their Vintner's Collection monovarietals in the past. First time I've tried their Meritage. I am duly impressed. And I said, for a $10 drink, you're not doing so bad here. And especially for those that, if you've got folks that are not big into the deeper, bolder versions of red wines, this is a surprisingly moderate, especially given its coloration. This coloration is down in the very purple range. So this is not it does not visually say, "Hey, I'm a light, easy drink." It is one of those deceptive ones that says, "Oh, look, I'm inky dark. I smell like black fruit, but I taste like a Grenache." Oh, I'd be rather curious. Very, very interesting. So let's say David Mary said that I've never tried the SVC Meritage, but it's mostly because they don't tell me what's in there. There you go. As David Mary pointing out, I like to know what's in the bottle. But believe me, they're not doing anything wrong with it. That's the good news. So I'm here to risk for you. That's exactly what we learn in these ideas is that you can use my palate for experimentation and not have to suffer in quiet dignity. So anyway, that is pretty impressive. I mean, I definitely love the idea that a second label is living up to its name to produce a quality product. I think that there are the strategy these days is instead of using your label or your brand, pardon me, your label, your brand with a second option. Instead, what they're doing is they are spinning up a whole new brand under the umbrella of a larger company. In other words, if your new label is part of a portfolio of wines that all belong under an umbrella brand or an umbrella, and by the way, when I say brand in that capacity, I mean a brand who will ensure distribution and availability, you can afford to say, "Oh, I want to rename this one the Spiderweb Red Blend," and then market it in whatever way you want. And then all of your distributors and your industry people know, "Oh yeah, by the way, it's one of the many constellation brands of wines, or it's one of any one of these big industry conglomerates that owns 40 or 50, 60 labels." because they're going to make sure that the products get there. They're going to have their advertising budget and their direct to industry contacts, which will get your wine a little leg up in the overall competitive scene and make sure that it gets to the appropriate folks. So, yes, you're welcome. My sacrifice. I'm here for you, David Mary. I'm here to drink wine on your behalf and make sure. I mean, I would say that I would drink wine so you don't have to, but that's literally counterproductive to my program. So I drink wine so you'll start drinking more. Wait a minute, that's a weird one too. I have to think of a new slug for that. Free your mind and your glass will follow is pretty clever, but got to come up with a reason of why I'm the reason why you drink. See, we can do a dozen of these that all sound kind of sad for everyone. Anyway, okay, Q&A portion of the show. A few comments from everybody. Does anybody have any questions about blending, about sterling, about vintners, about collections? I'm gonna poke the internet here while you guys come up with some chats. Let's actually go ahead and let's go to Sterling Vintners Collection. Let's go to Sterling proper and see what they say, if anything, about their wines. All right, so let's see. Sterling Vineyards, Vintners Collection. And yes, I'm 21. What year was I born? I always love to mess with these things and tell them I was born in 1901. Just to see if they're still if their computer guys are really running the data. So 1901. And I will accept all of your cookies. This doesn't, on the internet, this is not nearly as exciting as it is when you walk into a room and say, I will accept all of your cookies. I encourage you to try that next time you're at a party, by the way. All right, so let's see. Sterling Vineyards. I want, we're going to search around here for the trade section, which of course they have. So they are part of Treasury Wine Estates, TWE Global. That is one of the examples of an umbrella corporation I'm talking about. Yes, I'll accept your cookies too. But this brand, I mean, owns everything from Penfolds Grange to Matua to 19 Crimes to Pepperjack to Beaulieu Vineyards to Sterling to Lindemans. So Saddle Saint Jean. I mean, there are, 8 different labels I recognize from this particular brand that's on here. So we're going to check out their brands here. What I'm doing is I'm going to look for this is how to find a tasting note. All right, Sterling Vineyards. Yes, that's where you are. No, I don't want to view your website. I want you to tell me about your wine. Is this a circular process? Is this what we're doing? Usually the trade section is where you'll find things like tasting notes, shelf talkers, images for bottle shots, stuff to market their wines for. Yes, I know you were built in 1964. Okay, well, I guess we're gonna go to their website and we're gonna circle this around. Let's go to wines, all wines, wine type, red, varietal. That's what I'd actually like you to tell me. The one red blend. No, that's Winemaker Select Red. Apparently. No, see, this is all the Sterling brand. I want your Vintners Collection. Tell me what I asked for. Anyway, not doing any favor there at Sterling. There you go. We'll look at let's look it up by collection instead. Let's go the other direction around. Figure it out. So Rob Hammond says we're in the midst of a Beaujolais burger night. Now that is a definitely way to celebrate a Wednesday, Rob. I think that you're doing it absolutely right. Now, are you nouveauing it with a Beaujolais Nouveau, or are you drinking just a regular Beaujolais because it's always awesome no matter what time of year it is? I'm going to guess you're having Beaujolais Nouveau because it's December and that's what we do. It's how we roll, as the saying goes. All right, this is not a thing. This thing is killing me. Man, they apparently don't want you to know anything about the Vintners Collection. Showing 0 products. Well, fine. Free then. I won't do any research about my wine. Actually, but that does not have a good ring to it. Yeah. Well, it doesn't, not quite. Beaujolais burgers is good. That's more, you've got your onomatopoetically sounds good. And what's the other? Alliterative. That is a more alliterative name. Yeah, Beaujolais burger. Yeah, man, that sounds good. Now you made me want to have burgers, man. Right in the middle of my evening, and now I got to figure out how to find myself a kick-ass burger. Yeah, so same thing. Well, Barbara says that she's not having any luck finding it either. But well, there it goes. That just shows you sometimes. Well, and here's the interesting thing. So TWE, Treasury Wine Estates, if you're listening, you're screwing it up. Damn it. I mean, smaller wineries that pay attention to this stuff are better for their consumers. I want to be able to easily find a wine that I'm drinking and find out as much detail as you're willing to share. And if you're going to make that difficult to put barriers up, that's not good, especially for my guests, students, customers, all of you folks, fine folks who and fans. When you are moving out of that basic level into that medium, intermediate, or advanced level, this is the kind of information that you want to seek out. This is the stuff that you've learned to give a damn about. And if they're not going to give it to you, that tends to turn one off from a brand. I mean, I'm not gonna abandon Sterling just because they didn't tell me what's in this blend, but they're not doing themselves any favors either. So, Dave and Mary said you're finding Merlot driven with Cab Sauv, Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Cab Franc. Yeah, but where's that red fruit coming? You got nothing in that list, David and Mary, that has anything to do with that red fruit, and it's all over the front palate. Petit Verdot, I bet, is what's giving it its color. But I'm just surprised. I don't know. Maybe I'm having some sort of weird palate event. Don't know, but I'd be surprised if there's not something lighter in there. Which is, well, as Rob has already experimented with the lightest possible end of the street with his Beaujolais Nouveau. He's having Gamay-based wonderfulness. I read a description today that from a Somm that described Gamay as Pinot Noir's rude cousin from Jersey. A lot lower class, drives a Camaro, tells dirty jokes, but it's a hell of a lot of fun to hang out with. I wouldn't accuse anybody for being New Jersey. I think that's not very complimentary in any form, but I definitely agree with Gamay being that sort of grape that is just fast, loose, and fun. So you won't hear any arguments from me against that. Anyhow, all right, well, let's get you guys caught up for the last bit. For those that missed the front of the show, coming soon. We've got a short month. We've only got more online shows this month. We're going to do Wine and Cheese Part 7, Cheese Tools. We're going to learn about how to use all that weird stuff in the back of your junk drawer that you only pull out for parties, set on a piece of wood, and forget how they work. Then we're going to talk about the holidays in more broad spectrum, much more party perspective in the Deck the Halls episode, which we're going to talk about wine, we're going to talk about punches, we're going to talk about wassail, we're going to talk about spice cider. It's going to be all kinds of fun wine and cocktail night. So that's the end. That is the end of the shows for the paid shows for this year. But we have one more WineShark Wednesday next week, and I may do a WineShark Wednesday on the 30th if the mood takes me. We'll see where it goes. I kind of want to do a year in review, which won't be nearly as exciting as blowing up a giant 2020 like John Oliver did, but boy, it could be kind of close. So anyway, then we've also got the Reunion Tower show coming up this Saturday. Beer and wine combo from yours truly and 2 Penny Beer. So that's going to be a fun 3-beer, 3-wine show. A little bit of snacky bites in between, featuring some of our awesome pseudo gourmet foods that we do for the private tastings. So that's going to be awesome. More than just cheese and crackers, kind of cool. And then lastly but not leastly, we're going to be we're in the midway through the Advent calendar. If you guys are following along on that, it's an excellent wine exploration. I, of course, am not drinking a bottle of wine per day to keep up with you people. That's not my job. No, that I mean, it is my job, but not that kind. That's a little too extreme. So there's a lot of really fun wine on there. I would love if you guys have any questions about things or want to talk about styles. Almost everything in there you're going to see either have already seen in specific or are going to be seeing in future shows because it is an excellently broad variety. Wine Folly, again, big fan, and a shout out to, is doing a wine tour that is kind of similar. They feature one wine every, I think they're doing it every week, and they have they've got some cool rules about taking notes and taking tests and taking notes and doing comparative tasting. It's a really interesting study, and that a lot of my list was cribbed from theirs or was inspired by theirs because they did a great job of spreading things around. And so one of the things I tried to do with the calendar is give you guys some white, some red, some sparkling, lots of different flavor options, light to heavy, all in between. Just a great little way to really explore and expand your wine palette, not just stick to what we've been doing a lot of winter and fall themed wines, of course. So fall theme, we're moving into the winter theme, but we're going to be moving. This is much broader than that as opposed to just nice, cool weather wines. So you might learn something awesome, fun, and new, and especially if you have an opportunity to try varietals, styles, or countries that you've never had an opportunity to try. So, all right, Shannon said missed a few shows, and if you've been Cheese Tools is going to be great, Shannon. It's going to be, there's stuff with wires, there's weirdly funky shaped blades. I mean, the only thing, short of a medieval castle that has, all kinds of pole arms, there are not nearly as many fun shapes, weird tools, cleavers, micro axes, shredders. Cheese has its own whole set of cutlery that we are going to basically kind of touch on. I'm going to show some of my favorite tools that I use just in a casual, non-presentation way. I'm going to talk about, we're just going to talk about this cool thing, this topic, while of course we eat some cheese and drink some wine. You, ma'am, will also be very inspired because you should come to the Baca. You missed the Baca show. You need to come to Deck the Halls. We're going to be doing mulled wine. We're going to be doing a fantastic punch for the holidays for party entertaining, and we're going to talk about spice ciders as well. So, if you're in the mood for wassail, bring it, bring it, bring it. So. This does make me miss my growing up in the area in central Texas around New Braunfels, Texas. They are a highly Germanic town, as evidenced by the name. They have a wonderful wassail celebration in downtown where all the Christmas lights are set up around the circle, which is really a square because that's how Texas towns work. But anyway, down the downtown square, and then you walk around and visit various craft booths while every other booth is basically a spiced wine booth. And well, there's just no downside to that. There's literally no downside to Christmas crafts and drunk shopping for your very own knick-knack tallywhacks. And that's why you came home with 14 reindeer that all look like they've got a cowboy hat on. What the fuck have I bought? No one knows, I tell you. No one knows. But anyway, another glass of wine for your host, because, well, at least today's wine will actually get finished, like some of the other grocery store grabs that haven't made the cut. But, so that's kind of wrapping out the end of the year. If you guys have a chance to comment on the video after it goes live and put a lot of stuff in the comments, it is great for the channel. It helps us get the conversation going and lets YouTube know that, yes, you really are listening to what I say. So, outside just the chat here, which of course I love, if you'll comment there. Talk to me about what your favorite style of red blends are. What other white blends do you know? What kind of blend wine do you like at all, or are you a varietal purist? Let me know your questions and your comments. That would be awesome. If you like what we are doing, please like and subscribe to the channel. You'll get content updates whenever I do such things, but you can also share with a wine-loving friend. We're quickly approaching our 100 mark. Once we get 100 viewers, I'm going to do a show as Flynn Markley, my character from the Scarborough Renaissance Festival, so that you can see just how bad my British accent really is. But more importantly, it'll be a fun, silly celebration of the channel and all the support you guys are so awesomely giving me. Last but not least, if you really like what we're doing, your support over on Patreon would be most appreciated. We got special discounts, unique content, all kinds of cool stuff over on Patreon, plus an entire library of the paid shows that I do every Friday evening. So on the Friday shows, we record the whole thing, including my tasting notes, and they are archived there. So you've got a great resource for wine knowledge, and all you got to do is subscribe up to Patreon. So check those out when you have an opportunity. And if you guys have nothing else for me, I will say my adieus. I will wish you guys a very happy early December. We're going to talk next week. We're gonna bring in some Christmas traditions. We're going to talk a little bit about stuff like that, holiday traditions in general around the world, the way that the various holidays are celebrated. That'll be the topic of next week's WineShark Wednesday. At least I think so. And we're going to try some more awesome wines. I think I've got another blend coming up in that week, but we'll see. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed. Have a safe week. Be good out there. And cheers from your wine shark.